The sanctuary had just 30 minutes before the California wildfire consumed everything. Of all the animals being evacuated, Henry the bobcat was the only one not panicking. Unable to hear the chaos, he sat calmly in the back of his enclosure. Because Henry was so quiet, he was tragically overlooked by the shelter staff and volunteers. The deaf bobcat couldn't hear the sirens, couldn't hear the evacuation orders, couldn't hear his world burning down. He pressed his paws against the wire mesh, searching for Sarah, the keeper who always waved hello. But no one came. What happens when a deaf predator faces a firestorm alone? How long can he survive when everyone he loves has vanished? This is the story of Henry, the bobcat who couldn't hear danger coming, and the heroes who refused to leave him behind. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The sun rose over the San Gabriel Mountains with a deceptive clarity on that January morning. The light was sharp and crystalline, cutting through the chaparral and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the dry winter air. In the foothills of Los Angeles, the Sanctuary for Wild Souls was waking up. It was a time of routine, a comforting rhythm of metal latches clicking open, the slosh of water buckets, and the low, guttural greetings of the residents. Among the 60 wild animals that called this canyon home, there was one for whom the morning chorus meant nothing. Henry, a 20-pound bobcat with a coat the color of dried autumn leaves and eyes like polished amber, sat atop his favorite wooden platform. He watched the world with the intense, stoic observation of a creature who has seen many seasons. Henry was a senior lynx rufus, a survivor of a hit-and-run accident years ago that had left him with a slight limp and, eventually, total deafness. In the wild, a deaf predator is a ghost destined to fade. They cannot hear the twig snap under a prey's hoof or the screech of a hawk above. But here, in the safety of the sanctuary, Henry's silence was his fortress. He did not hear the lions roaring for their breakfast 2 enclosures down. He did not hear the scrub jays scolding the caretakers. He felt the vibration of footsteps through the wood of his platform, and he knew the sun by the warmth on his ruff. Sarah, the sanctuary's lead keeper, approached Henry's enclosure with a bucket of thawed quail. She paused at the mesh, raising her hand in a specific wave, a visual signal they had developed over the years. Henry blinked slowly. It was a cat kiss. He recognized Sarah not by the sound of her voice, but by her silhouette and the way she moved. Efficient, calm, and kind. She entered the enclosure, placing the food on the lower log. "Good morning, old man," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear it. The ritual was for her as much as for him. She watched him descend, his movements stiff but dignified, the tufts on his ears twitching instinctively even though they gathered no sound. The morning felt perfect. The light was bright and unblemished. There was no indication that within hours, this canyon would become a furnace. By noon, the atmosphere had shifted. The infamous Santa Ana winds began to howl, sweeping down from the high desert, compressing and heating up as they rushed through the canyons. The humidity plummeted. The air, previously crisp, became charged with static electricity. Then came the smell. It wasn't the cozy scent of a wood stove. It was the acrid chemical tang of burning sagebrush and eucalyptus. The phone in the sanctuary office rang. A shrill, persistent sound that cut through the wind. The agonizing news came from the fire marshal. A blaze had started near the ridge, fueled by the 60-mile-per-hour gusts. It was moving fast. They weren't under an advisory. They were under an immediate evacuation order. 30 minutes, the director shouted, slamming the phone down. We have 30 minutes to clear the facility. Move! Move! Panic, usually suppressed by professional training, bubbled just beneath the surface. Evacuating a shelter of domesticated dogs is difficult. Evacuating 60 wild animals, including mountain lions, tigers, bears, and bobcats, in half an hour is a logistical nightmare bordering on the impossible. The sanctuary transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Transport trucks roared to life, their engines struggling against the wind. Keepers ran with catch poles, heavy-duty gloves, and transport crates. The air filled with the sounds of distress. Animals, sensing the barometric pressure change and the scent of smoke, were pacing anxiously. The tigers were chuffing and roaring, their deep bass calls reverberating off the canyon walls. The wolves were howling, a mournful, terrified sound. Sarah was directing the loading of the larger predators. "Get the squeeze cage on the cougar. Careful with the tranquilizer," she yelled over the wind. Her eyes were stinging from the smoke that was now visible. A dark, bruising bruise on the southern horizon, spreading rapidly to blot out the sun. In the midst of this sensory assault, the shouting humans, the screaming machinery, the roaring animals, the howling wind, Henry remained in his own world. The wind rattled the chain-link fence of his enclosure, but Henry just assumed it was a breezy day. He had finished his quail and had climbed back to the rear of his enclosure, into a small wooden den box lined with straw. It was his safe space, dark and cozy. He curled up, tucking his nose beneath his tail. The vibrations of the heavy trucks rumbling past were dampened by the thick bedding. He couldn't hear the sirens wailing on the highway. He couldn't hear the frantic radio chatter. A volunteer, a young man named Jason, was assigned the row of smaller enclosures. He was terrified. The smoke was thick now, ash falling like gray snow. He ran down the line, checking cages. "Bobcat 1 loaded," he shouted to himself, checking a clipboard. He looked into Henry's enclosure. The front area was empty. The platform was bare. The food was gone. In the swirling ash and adrenaline-fueled haste, Jason made a fatal assumption. He saw no movement. He saw no pacing animal. Unlike the other bobcats who were throwing themselves against the mesh in terror, Henry's enclosure was still. "He must have been grabbed by the other team," Jason muttered, coughing as a gust of smoke hit him. He checked the box on the sheet, cleared, and ran to the next cage where a raccoon was frantically clawing at the door. The human mind is prone to filling in gaps when under extreme stress. The staff was working with a skeleton crew. Communication radios were patchy due to the terrain, and the heat was becoming unbearable. The urgency to save lives overrode the redundancy of double-checking. Minutes ticked by. The 30-minute window closed. "That's it. We have to go. The fire is cresting the ridge," the fire marshal screamed, waving the convoy out. The trucks, laden with terrified, growling cargo, rumbled out of the sanctuary gates. Sarah, driving the lead van, did a mental head count, her heart pounding against her ribs. She looked in the rearview mirror at the cloud of orange and black smoke consuming the place she loved. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that every soul was on board. The gates were left open, a standard protocol to give stragglers a chance if they escaped. But Henry was locked in his enclosure, fast asleep. The convoy disappeared down the winding road. The noise of the engines faded. Silence returned to the sanctuary. But it was a different kind of silence. It was heavy, hot, and menacing. Henry woke up because the temperature had spiked. The air in his den box, usually cool, felt stifling. He stretched, extending his claws, and yawned. He stepped out of his box, expecting to see the afternoon sun. Instead, he stepped into a nightmare. The sky was a terrifying, violent orange. The sun was a blood-red disk barely visible through the choking clouds. Ash fell around him like hot rain, dusting his beautiful coat in gray. He shook his head, sneezing. The smell was overpowering. For the first time, Henry felt the prickle of true fear. He looked toward the keeper's lodge. He looked for Sarah. He looked for the movement of the volunteers. There was nothing. He trotted to the front of the enclosure, his limp slightly more pronounced. He stood on his hind legs, pressing his paws against the wire mesh. He opened his mouth to meow, a raspy cracking sound that he couldn't hear. But no one came. The heat was intensifying. To the west, through the thicket of manzanita, he saw the flickering tongues of the beast. Fire. Even a deaf animal knows fire. It is ancestral knowledge, written into the DNA of every living thing. Henry began to pace. Not the frantic, chaotic thrashing of a younger cat, but the determined, confused pacing of a senior who knows the routine has been broken. Where are the hands that feed? Where is the water? The smoke began to sink lower, heavier than the air. Henry coughed, his small lungs struggling against the particulate matter. He retreated to the back of the enclosure, away from the wire that was becoming hot to the touch. He went to his water bowl, but it was already filled with ash, turning the water into a sludge. He was alone. The silence in his ears was absolute, protecting him from the terrifying roar of the approaching firestorm, but isolating him in a bubble of confusion. He sat down, wrapped his tail around his paws, and watched the orange glow grow brighter. He didn't understand why he had been left. He simply waited, with the heartbreaking patience of an animal, for the humans he trusted to return. 10 miles away, at the evacuation staging ground in a high school parking lot, the adrenaline was crashing, replaced by the cold reality of logistics. Sarah was moving from crate to crate, checking hydration levels. She held her clipboard, her hands trembling slightly. Simba is here. Luna is here. Rocky is here, she muttered, checking off the mountain lions. She moved to the smaller crates. Pixie. Wait. She frowned. She looked at the crate labeled Henry. She peered inside through the ventilation holes. Empty. Her heart stopped. The blood drained from her face, leaving her dizzy. She checked the next crate. Maybe he was mislabeled. Maybe he was in with the other Bobcat, Pixie, though that would be dangerous. She ran down the line of trucks. Where is Henry? Who has Henry? Jason, the volunteer, looked up from pouring water for a coyote. I checked the cage. It was still. I thought Team B had him. Team B thought you had him, Sarah screamed, a sound of pure anguish. The realization hit the team like a physical blow. The silence that followed was louder than the fire. They had left him. The gentle, deaf old man was back there, alone. Sarah turned and ran toward the van. I'm going back. You can't. The fire marshal blocked her path, his face streaked with soot. The canyon is fully involved. The roads are closed. It's a zero visibility zone. If you go back in there, you die, and you won't save him. He's deaf, she sobbed, collapsing against the hood of the truck. He doesn't know what's happening. He's just sitting there. The hopelessness was suffocating. The police barricades were up. The fire was a monster now, consuming thousands of acres. No civilian was allowed in. But there are those who walk where others cannot. A volunteer standing nearby, witnessing the breakdown, pulled out her phone. "Call SWOT," she said urgently. "Call starts with 1 today." Starts with 1 Today was a specialized animal rescue network known for doing the impossible. They were a team of ex-military veteran firefighters and expert animal handlers who had the credentials, the gear, and the courage to enter exclusion zones. Sarah made the call, her voice thick with tears, explaining the situation. "He's a senior. He's deaf. He's in enclosure 4. Please." "We're rolling," the voice on the other end said. Simple, direct. Miller, the lead responder for SWAT, drove the heavy-duty 4x4 truck. Next to him was Elena, a vet tech with nerves of steel. They had the clearance codes and the specialized respirators. They reached the police barricade. The officer shook his head. "It's hell in there, Miller. Visibility is 0. "We have a confirmed life in danger," Miller said, his jaw set. "We're going in." The drive up the canyon road was a journey into the underworld. To the left and right, the hillsides were skeletal remains of glowing embers. Telephone poles hung by their wires, swinging like pendulums. The heat radiated through the floorboards of the truck. "Air quality is critical," Elena said, checking her monitor. "If he's alive, he's barely hanging on." They reached the sanctuary gates. The main office was gone, reduced to a chimney and a foundation. The storage shed was burning. But the wind had shifted slightly, just enough to push the main wall of fire away from the line of enclosures where Henry lived. It was a miracle of physics. Miller parked the truck. They donned their full-face respirators and grabbed the bolt cutters and the catch pole. "Henry!" Miller yelled, then cursed himself. "Right, Def. Look for eyes." They moved through the smoke. It was thick, swirling like fog. The heat was oppressive, singing the hair on their arms. They reached enclosure 4. At first, it looked empty. The wooden platform was smoldering on one side. The water bowl was dry. "I don't see him," Elena said, her voice tight. Miller shone his high-beam flashlight into the back corner, into the small wooden den box. 2 amber eyes reflected the beam. Henry was there. He was pressed as far back into the corner as he could go. He was covered in ash, his fur matted. He was panting, his mouth open, his tongue lolling. He wasn't moving. Miller used the bolt cutters on the lock. Snap! The gate creaked open. Henry didn't bolt. He didn't growl. He was too exhausted, too confused. When he saw the figures in the terrifying masks enter his space, he flinched, pressing harder against the wood. Miller lowered his posture. He removed the mask for a split second, a dangerous move, just so the cat could see a human face, not a monster. He blinked slowly. Henry, despite the smoke, despite the terror, recognized the movement. A human. A helper. Miller moved in with the catch pole, but he didn't need to be aggressive. He gently looped it over Henry's head. Henry offered no resistance. He was limp, his body surrendering to the fatigue of smoke inhalation. Miller scooped the 20-pound cat up in his arms, wrapping him instantly in a fire-retardant blanket. "I got him. I got the package." "He's wheezing," Elena said, pressing a stethoscope to the blanket as they ran back to the truck. "Lungs are full of fluid. We need oxygen now." As they sped away from the burning sanctuary, leaving the inferno behind, Henry lay on the back seat, an oxygen mask pressed over his muzzle. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He couldn't hear the roar of the fire fading. He couldn't hear the engine. but he could feel the vibrations of the truck, a steady, rhythmic thrumming that felt like a giant purr. And for the first time in 12 hours, he closed his eyes and slept without fear. The reunion at the emergency veterinary clinic was a scene that brought hardened firefighters to tears. When the SWOT truck pulled in, Sarah was waiting. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single day. When she saw Miller step out carrying the crate, she collapsed to her knees. They rushed Henry into the trauma room. The vet, Dr. Aris, worked quickly. Severe smoke inhalation, dehydration, mild burns on his paw pads from the hot ground. Henry was sedated and placed in an oxygen chamber. It was a clear plexiglass box that filled with cool, clean, oxygen-rich air. Sarah sat by the glass. She placed her hand against it. Inside, Henry, groggy and battered, lifted his head. He saw her. He didn't have the energy to stand, but he extended one paw and pressed it against the glass, directly opposite hers. He let out a silent meow. "I'm so sorry, Henry." Sarah wept, her forehead resting against the cool plastic. "I'm so sorry." The recovery was not overnight. For weeks, Henry had a hacking cough. His lungs needed time to clear the soot. He was monitored 24/7. But the resilience of nature is a powerful thing. Henry was a fighter. He had survived the wild. He had survived a car, and now he had survived the fire. During his recovery, the story of the deaf bobcat who slept through the apocalypse went viral. Donations poured in, not just for Henry, but to rebuild the sanctuary. People were moved by the image of the silent sentinel, the cat who kept his watch while the world burned. 6 months later, the scars on the land were beginning to heal. Green shoots of grass were pushing up through the blackened soil of the canyon. Fire poppies and wild morning glories reclaiming the earth. The sanctuary had been rebuilt, better and safer than before. It was a late July evening. The light was no longer the harsh white glare of winter, nor the terrifying orange of the fire. It was the golden hour, warm, syrupy, and forgiving. In the newly constructed senior center, a specialized enclosure with ramps and soft bedding, Henry was busy. He was stalking a butterfly. He moved with the silent grace of his ancestors, his tufted ears twitching, his bobbed tail vibrating with intensity. The butterfly landed on a piece of driftwood. Henry wiggled his haunches and pounced. He missed, of course. He was an old man, and his reflexes weren't what they used to be. The butterfly fluttered away. Henry sat up and licked his paw with feigned indifference, as if to say, "I meant to do that." Sarah watched him from the bench nearby. She held a cup of tea, enjoying the peace. The guilt still lingered occasionally, but watching Henry thrive had helped her heal too. She waved her hand. Henry turned immediately. His amber eyes were clear, the smoke damage fully healed. He trotted over to the mesh, purring so hard that his whole body vibrated. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a king reclaiming his throne. He had his favorite spot back, a high hammock that caught the evening breeze. He spent his days there, hanging out, watching the birds he couldn't hear, feeling the warmth of the sun he loved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and soft pink, Henry climbed into his hammock. He kneaded the blanket for a moment, circled 3 times, and settled down. The world outside was noisy. Crickets chirping, distant traffic, the wind in the trees. But Henry's world was quiet. It was a peaceful, safe silence. He closed his eyes, let out a long, contented sigh that rippled through his ribs and drifted off to sleep, knowing that this time he would not be left behind. He was home. And in the silence, there was only love.